Okay, this is section 3.9, and it's writing linear functions. And these are the word problems that I assigned. I'm try to get both of them on this. If we have the directions to solve the problems and assume that each situation can be described by a linear function. That means these can be represented as lines, in other words. All right. So now, when you see this information that it cost $110 for 3 hours for the plumber to work at your house and $160 for him to work for 5 hours, and they want to know how much to work for 8 hours, one of the things you might think is that you could just do proportions and solve this, but that doesn't work. It said it was a linear function, but proportions are special kinds of linear functions. Proportions are linear functions. We have to know something's directly proportional to use a linear function, to use proportions. And they didn't tell us these were directly proportional. They just told us they were linear functions. So here's what I'm noticing. I'm going to have to make some points so I can find the slope, because here's what kind of formula I'm going to use. I'm going to use the point-slope formula, because I got 2 points given, and they're not y-intercepts, so I know I'm not going to use y equal mx plus b, slope-intercept form. But because I have points, I know the easiest equation for me to use is going to be the point-slope form. Okay, and I know that I got to plug in a point, but I also see that I'm going to need the slope, and I can find that because I've got information, and I can make 2 points out of this information. Now, when you make the points, you might think you could do 110, 3 and 160, 5, but that's not quite right. When we make our points, if you remember, your x value has to be your independent variable, and the y value has to be the dependent variable. Now, if you think about it, how much the cost you pay the plumber is determined by how many hours he works. Cost depends on the time he works. So time has to be our independent variable, and the price we pay the plumber, the cost, has to be the dependent variable. So if I'm going to make points out of this information, I'm going to do that up by those points. I'm going to have to say, well, the time was 3 and the cost was 110, and then the second one, the time was 5 and the cost was 160. And so in this last one, the time is going to be 8, and that's what I'm trying to find in this problem, is what's the cost when it's 8 hours. The time is 8. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is find the slope, so I can plug it in over there. Okay, so if I'm going to find the slope, let me label my points up there where they are. And I didn't leave myself a lot of room to work, so I had to kind of cram them in there. 3 is x1, and 110 is y1. x2 is 5, and y2 is 160. I'm just saying this is point 1, and this is point 2. Okay. So if I need to know my slope formula. If you don't know it, you need to have it memorized by now. You subtract the y's on top, and you can just remember y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let me go plug in the information. I'm going to put those subtraction signs down, and then let me go plug in the points I see up here. Well, my y2 was 160. Just labeled those points. My y1 was 110. And 160 minus 110 on top of that fraction is going to be 50. And then on the bottom, I have x2 is 5 and x1 is 3. 5 minus 3 is 2. So 50 over 2 means my slope is 25. That's what I'm going to stick right up here where I just wrote the 25. Now, I need to plug in a point, and then I'll have an equation, and I can use it to find my answer to the question they asked me. If I'm plugging in the point, my x1 up here I chose to be 3, so that's going to go right here. And the y1 we chose to be 110, so that's going to go right there. Oh, my equal sign did not take. Okay. So now, this is an equation. It's a perfectly good equation. Sometimes what we do when we're going to plug a point in is we go ahead and move the terms around, but you don't have to. And since you're only going to ask one thing here, maybe you don't take the time to do that. Because right now, what I can do is I've got a perfectly good equation. I can plug in x equal 8 and find that when the time is 8, that's a funky looking 8. Let me try to make it look more like an 8. When x equal 8, what's the cost for that many hours, okay? So the cost is the y. I don't know it. That's what I'm solving for. Now the time is the x, so it's 8 minus 3. Well, 8 minus 3 is 5, right? So now I have 110. Y minus 110 is 25 times 5, and 25 times 5 is 125. So to solve for y, which is going to be the answer to my question, the cost, I'm going to add 110 to both sides. and I'm going to get y equal 532, $235. So it's going to cost $235 for the plumber to do an 8-hour job. Okay, this problem is much like number 3. They've given us a cost of how much an airline's going to charge you for a ticket to fly a certain number of miles. It's probably based on the gas costs that they have to fly that certain amount of miles. And just like before, I can look at this information as they've given me 2 points, but I got to create the points first, and then I can write an equation from 2 points. Okay, so it's kind of just an extension of what we were doing in the lesson. And again, remember your independent variable has to go first. And doesn't the cost depend on the number of miles? So my independent, I'm going to call my point x and y here, but the x is going to represent the number of miles we fly because the cost, which is my y, depends on the number of miles I fly. Your x is your independent variable. You plug it into an equation, and the y you get out of it depends on what you plugged in. So since cost depends on how many miles we go, we would want to make it cost the dependent variable. So if I make my points, and I'll just make them up here at the top, out to the side of this, my miles I flew on the first set of information was 260 miles, and it cost me $90. On the second point, I flew 500 miles, and it cost me $150. And what I want to do is plug in 1,000 and see how much it cost me, okay? So that's what I'm trying to find in the end. So I can take these 2 points, and I can find the slope between the 2 points. Again, you might think, oh, I could just do a proportion on this, but they didn't tell you they were directly proportional. They said they were represented by a line. You just can't assume something's directly proportional unless they say directly proportional or varies directly. So what I got to do is find the slope. And the reason I know I got to find the slope is if I got 2 points, the easiest equation for me to use to find my equation of my line is the point slope formula, because you got a point and we can find the slope. And that point slope formula is y minus y1 is mx minus x1. Okay? So now let's find the slope. I need to label my points. Okay, this time I left myself a little more room. I labeled the first point x1, y1, the second point x2, y2. So here we go. Let's find our slope. The slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so I got a fraction, and I'm subtracting on top, and I'm subtracting on bottom. Let's go plug those numbers in, and I'll do it in red. y2 was 150. And y1 was 90. 150 minus 90 is 60. On the bottom, x2 minus x1. x2 is 500. x1 was 260. Okay, so 500 minus 260 would be 240. And that reduces down. 60 goes into 60 once, and 60 goes into 240 4 times. So my slope is a fourth. Let me put that over here in my formula. Now, I know I'm going to have a y, and I know I'm going to have an x in my end. This x1, y1 is where I'm supposed to put a point. Now, I can use either one of those points you want to, okay? I'm going to pick the second point, and the reason I'm picking it is because I noticed that I got 1,000 down there, and I think the subtraction would be easier, and I don't have a calculator right now that I could use, so I'm just doing this in my head. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to call, I know I labeled them x2, y2, but you can pick either point. So the x value goes over here, so we'll put 500 here, and the y value that goes with it is 150. Okay? Now, that's a perfectly good equation. I could solve it for y if I wanted to, but nobody said I had to, because all I got to do now is they want me to, I've got an equation, I can use it. All I got to do is plug in x equal 1,000, because we got 1,000 miles, and the cost is my y. So I need to find y. And so I just plug it into that equation. Y minus 150 is 1/4. And the x I'm plugging in is 1,000 minus 500. Okay. Well, 1 minus 150 is 1/4 of 500, because 1,000 minus 500 is 500. That's the reason I picked that point. I could kind of tell that subtraction was coming up. You could have picked the other one. 1/4 of 500, let's see. see what that would be. Would be 125. A fourth of 500 is 125. So y minus 150 is 125. And then if I add 150 to both sides, I'd get the y, which is the cost of my airline ticket for 1,000 miles, is going to be 275. Okay? So the cost is 275. You know, I told you when you have a word problem, you should write your answer in a sentence. It can be that short. That's the answer, and you just put the cost is 275. That's okay.